Council on Mondays, which will be led by Councilmember Dugan.
Over your heart and please join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call.
You are reconvening, opened at 4 o'clock.
Yes, we're reconvening. We opened at 4 o'clock. Thank you, Madam. Okay. Now is the time for public communications related to city business only, 5-minute limit per person, 30-minute total.
Good afternoon. My name is Penny Gundo. I am the president of the Library Board of Trustees, and I'd like to speak to you about the full-time library assistant position that is currently under consideration. The El Segundo Public Library is not only comprised of the services and the people that you see at the beautiful building in the ESUSD public school system, maintaining 4 branches outside of the main library. While many schools in surrounding areas are limiting access or are unable to provide students with any on-campus library services, ESUSD 5 days a week through a successful partnership with ED, ESPL, and the El Segundo Unified School District. El Segundo Public Library, through the main branch, provides patrons with an array of activities, programs, educational workshops, and services, programs, registering record numbers of students, preschool through high school, and this year, with the addition of the highly successful adult summer reading program, means our library is engaging and connecting with our community. After 5 years as a member of the, including that of president, I've learned of the behind-the-scenes struggles of the staff at the ESPL. Despite the challenges the staff face, they greet patrons with a smile, manage successful library programs with energy, and create the illusion that the library is to multitask, cross-training themselves and one another to ensure that the services and the patrons do not suffer the consequences of not only less staff, but frequent staff turnover. I have been impressed by the staff's willingness to help other departments out, to take time away from their own duty. We do all of these things for one another, no matter what our job, but the way the library staff pulls together is inspiring. The ESPL library staff have become one of the most flexible teams I have witnessed. In a day, you may see a youth librarian leading story time and behind-the-scenes work is continued. From there, they take time to catalog new items, assisting with the staggering 9,000 plus materials that the library processes each year, and then finally back to youth services to complete their own task list for the day. As I mentioned, currently, these items are processed between duties and patrons when there are no immediate tasks to be met by the library staff. This leaves new and in-demand titles sitting in boxes waiting to be entered into the system. Patrons are often asking. Last year, Richmond School PTA donated 6 full boxes of books to the school library. We only just received them into the school in the last few weeks. Of particular concern in the schools are books and materials needed to complete student projects. A library must meet that need. Library staff are doing their best to prioritize the materials needed, but working with so many successful programs and workshops leaves little time to catalog materials. This doesn't even take into account the time department manager to leave them in a long line of materials needing to be cataloged. The staff members working in the schools, currently there are 7 of us, look at the staff at the main for support, guidance, and managing the offsite branches and reference support. We experience many IT problems working in the schools. The networking between the school district and the city systems is complicated and difficult to maintain. The staff at the main branch help as much as they can, but because systems require constant follow-up and have experienced far too many days in the schools, unable to log into the system, handwriting student checkouts so that they do not suffer because of our IT failings. This type of library visit is much compromised for the students because handwriting 2 books per student for a class overrides my ability to be able to read a story, assist with book suggestions, and follow up on fines and overdue titles. Having a full-time staff member that will be able to help us, especially when the city IT people are unavailable, Fridays for example, would be a tremendous full-time position for cataloging and technology. The department managers are freed up to do their assigned job tasks. Continuing to run at the status quo puts the library in danger of not being able to provide services that the community loves and expects. Okay.
Good evening, Council. I'm Sarah Whalen, former president of the Library Board of Trustees and current board member. I spent considerable time at the El Segundo Public Library. I am following up on Penny's thoughts and speaking in support of this council funding the prior council's authorized full-time library assistant position. The prior council authorized funding for this position. The position was never funded and still sits vacant. As a result of the vacancy, other library staff is filling in and performing duties they were not hired for or being paid for. There is not enough staff to currently process books and orders in a timely fashion. This means books come in after school because the library does not have the materials for the students' assigned homework. The library is one of El Segundo's gems, just like the schools, the parks, and the people. The programs the library runs are remarkable, given that they only staff 30 people. They are open 6 days a week, comprising of 62 work hours. I understand the priority and need for the city to fund safety and infrastructure, but at this time, the library, its staff, and patrons need the help of a full-time assistant. The library has requested in 3 years. We are currently only $13,000 away from getting the library assistant position funded with only a few part-time vacancies. The bottom line is that if the people come to the library and cannot get the services and materials that they want at Library Park, funding the position would have a very minimal fiscal impact on the city, but a very positive impact on the library staff and all of its patrons, old and young. Please consider our request. Thank you.
See no more public communications. We'll close for council comments. Thank you. That takes us to the budget workshop. Yes, you do conference with city labor negotiator, employee organizations. No, that's
We have a
closed session.
request for a resolution related to the ABC grant.
Action regarding adoption of a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract accepting $47,674 in grant funding from the Department of Alcohol, Beverage, and Control. Fiscal impact zero.
Yes, this is actually sort of a cleanup item. Mayor and members to attach a resolution at that previous date that the Department of Alcohol, Beverage Control requires. So we're simply asking you to adopt the resolution that memorializes the decision that you already made.
Move approval of the resolution.
All in favor? The next item is consideration and possible action regarding city council guidance to staff for preparing the fiscal year 2016-17 proposed budget. Staff will present fiscal year 2015-16 third quarter updates, challenges, limitations, assumptions associated with fiscal impact. None. City manager?
Yep, Mayor and members of council, I'm pleased to present this year's budget. It is sort of a mixed message in that you'll see in a moment that we're ending this year, our budget year end in September, with enhanced revenues above what we had originally budgeted and with expenses coming in at below what we had budgeted. For next year, we're seeing positive revenue growth, which is a good sign. We are seeing increases in our operating expenses, though, which offset or partially covering or feeling the effects of the recession. We continue to struggle with rebuilding our reserves, and we continue to struggle with purchasing equipment and making necessary repairs to our facilities and figuring out how to afford those items. So the presentation tonight, Joe, expect to close this year. It ends at the end of September. Our look at next year. We are going to talk about CIP as capital improvement projects. We're going to review the capital improvement projects that are funded, mostly in sewer. We're also going to talk about what our CIP needs are going forward. And then we're going to talk about reserve policy. So the budget discussion tonight really focuses on two things. The vast majority of the budget is the city's base operating budget, which is based on our. After we account for those dollars, we have needs, and we have some level of additional funds that are available to meet those needs. The level of additional funds, we've really developed options around. So later in the meeting, we'll get into various reserve policy options and additional funding requests and needs that the city has. I have attempted to prioritize those in the form of various recommendations around the 4 reserve policy options. They agree with my prioritization and which reserve policy option to take. This is very much a team effort led by Joe Lilio and his finance department staff, but also with the involvement of all the department heads. The preparation of a budget, it was assisted and informed by the strategic planning sessions that we had. So when we get into the reserve policy options, you'll see that we've organized the additional funding requests around the strategic planning goals and objectives. And at this point, I'm going to introduce Mayor. This is about a 55-slide presentation. You may want to consider a break partway through. All right.
First slide is another major one is a TOT, 1.1 million, and that's related to it became effective June 1st, bringing the TOT rate from 8% to 12%. And for this current year, that brings in an anticipated $1.1 million more than what the budget is. User utility tax, this is a big hit, anticipated budget, and this is really due to the commodity price of natural gas. So that's been a big hit on our user utility tax and the cogen electric as well. And also water. The big ones are from the lower commodity prices in natural gas. Another large one is if you go down to the bottom there, other revenues, and most of that is one-time revenue from developer fees. So about $900,000 of that's from the developer fees one time. $200,000 is from the property transfer tax. So that came in a little bit higher than anticipated as well. Third quarter expenditure, $45.9 million, about 71% of the budget expended. And again, that should be, if you just took a flat line approach, about 75%. So we're trending under budget there. And we're anticipated to trend under budget through the end of the fiscal year with about savings is attributable towards vacancies that's resulting in salary and benefit savings.
Mayor, when are questions appropriate? After slide.
Absolutely. I'm open to questions.
Okay. So on these particular slides here, the expenditures are proving out to be less than anticipated.
Correct.
The revenue comes more. Looking at them together, about $2 million better for the city than we expected.
Correct.
Okay. So I'd like to understand if this is some kind of a trend, 3 to 5 years, comparing our expectations with what really occurs. And you may not know the answer to that tonight, but it's something I'd like to ferret out in the next couple of weeks as we're moving towards a...
Absolutely. And if I may, Dr. Brand, just go back to the revenue slide momentarily. So again, here, if you look bottom right-hand corner, we're anticipating about $1.4 million above budget in revenues, and which that was not anticipated in the budget. So a vast majority for the current year anyways is because of Measure B for the revenues.
And Joe, you said for expenditures, they're lower than anticipated because we have vacancies.
Correct.
So, and as we're...
Also, expenditures will increase, and I'll use PD as an example. So PD is down a few officers, so they have an increase in overtime. So some of that savings is offset in other categories, such as overtime.
And then Joe, almost 1.1.
Sure, 900,000 of that is attributable towards one-time revenue, so those were not ongoing, just one-time developer fees.
Okay.
And that's
Council
Raytheon.
approved a development agreement with Raytheon for our business license penalty and interest for about $600,000.
The triple flip.
No, we're going to get to that when we talk about
Okay.
the revenues.
And then I'd like to point out, elected officials is $786,000. That doesn't mean the 7 elected officials are making, that is the cost for the offices, for all of the personnel and support in the city council office, the city treasurer office, and the city clerk office. That is
Correct.
not
That's
the
correct.
elected officials.
Correct. So this is a snapshot of the general fund balance. So we began the fiscal year October 1st with a fund balance of about $13.2 million. When you factor in the anticipated revenues and expenditure balance and the city's current funding policy, reserve policy is 19%, which puts us at 12.3 million, which we'll meet, and we'll have 1.8 million in undesignated reserves that will carry over into the new. So I'm going to get into the 16-17 budget assumptions and proposed operating budget. Let's go over a few of the high-level budget conditions. Our goal is to maintain prudent fiscal control and management over the budget process. Revenue growth. We did add Measure B to the baseline revenue. We maintained flat budgets for all departments. Basically, that was taking the status quo 15-16 and bring that over into 16-17 for all their operations. I'll use my department as an example. So I have an auditor contract that's a multi-year contract, and there's an automatic 3% escalation in that contract. So there were some contractual agreements that did, although we'll go over that in a minute. And we also sought opportunities for permanent reductions from departments when possible. So we do have ongoing employee negotiations, and one thing I do want to point out in the 16-17 budget is we are bringing that into the 16-17 year. So we do have negotiations going on with 5 labor groups. Any resolution that increases salary or benefits will have to be taken out of reserves. So that's one factor I do.
Question on the conditions. When you said flat, the flat, maintain flat budgets, was that where they came in, or what you had, like, so for instance, on the police, where you indicated that we have openings that have not been filled, so where did you carry over?
So when I
Assuming
say
that
flat, it's
police
the
decision?
operating and maintenance.
Okay.
So yeah, and
So
fully
they approved.
staffed.
Okay.
Correct.
Just want to make sure.
So real quick on this one, policy discussion, increase the general 20% for next year. So again, council does have a adopted policy to bring the funding level of general reserve from 19% to 20% next year, and we'll get into a discussion later on certain options around that policy. Some fiscal and policy decisions, and one thing I do want to point out here, CalPERS is on a fiscal year of June 30. This past June 30, 2016, their annual portfolio had a return of 0.68%, so less than 1%. The year prior to that, they had, their target is 7.5%. So the impact that the last 2 years have had is skewing their long-term actual returns. And I'll give you an example here. This came directly from the CalPERS board, 0.9%. Their average 10-year return dropped to 5.1%, and their 20-year return dropped to 7%. So there will be discussions by CalPERS board on whether to adjust that discount rate prior years, with the realization that they're not meeting that 7.5%, even in their 3, 10, and 20-year targets. They may have some pressures to lower that, which will have increases to municipalities that participate in the CalPERS pool. Correct.
Today, and I know you don't have it yet, but how long will it be before CalPERS tells us what our responsibility is to make up the difference?
So it will be during their next actuarial study, which won't be until next year, this time next year.
You've already made it clear what the escalation of the expectation for the cities will be, regardless of the poor performance of their portfolio. We already know over the next few years what CalPERS after they've laid out. Now, whether they go back in and change that and increase it is up in the air. But we're already facing annual increases that you're going to have to work into the 16-17 budget.
Reflected on a subsequent slide here, but yes, there is CalPERS increases at least going out for the next 3 years. Some other fiscal uncertainties outside the city's control would be workers' compensation costs and health. The average healthcare as a pool, the healthcare costs are going up 4.1%. This is a depiction of two tables. On the left side is the project totaling $67.8 million. And the table on the right is the proposed 16-17 expenditures for the general fund, totaling $66.6 million, including transfers out. And there'll be more details. I just kind of put things in perspective. I did put a 10-year history of the general fund. So this is 07-08 through the proposed 16-17 budget. The bar on the left, the blue bar.
So Joe, on this one, the worst shortfall in cash was about, or in, well, we had a dip in the reserves, I guess, but about $10 million between revenue and expenses. Is that accurate?
I believe that is correct.
2009 and 10, so I just, and so we're a bigger gap. So just so we're clear, $10 million is as bad as it's ever gotten in terms of, and we didn't dip into the reserves to the tune of $10 million, right?
No.
We dip into the reserves a couple million. Can you talk, so we can get a sense of what's likely to occur in the event of another economic catastrophe?
Right, so we did dip into reserves in 09-10. We actually had an economic uncertainty reserve fund, $6 million.
But I think to answer your question, Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem, we did a number of things. We let positions go vacant as people left the organization. We didn't fund equipment replacement 1 year. We provided concessions that helped us save money. We put off purchases and really looked for a variety of ways to reduce our costs. We also did a few things on the revenue side, ambulance transport, the revenue side of the equation.
And in going back even to early 90s, which must have been painful for El Segundo with all the aerospace government cutbacks, do you recall roughly what the shortfall was back then?
Shows a 20-year history.
Ah, perfect. Thank you.
But to Greg's point, we did have a lot of deferred maintenance that was needed, deferred CIP projects that were very much needed, and we're going to see some of those.
I just want to point out that in the fall of 2008, the council pledged double-digit increases over a 3-year period to all the associations and so forth. That was in 8-9 at the front end of the recession. That's why you see the damages in 9-10 and the collective begging beginning.
You have the general fund revenues and expenditures. You'll see a decline in 02-03, where expenditures exceeded revenues. Again in 07-08, and then 09-10 and 10-11.
Joe, who's our biggest? I know Chevron pays the most taxes, $6 million a year, roughly. Who's second? Can't say that?
Yeah, I think that's not open for dissemination.
Let me ask it a different way. The next highest employer that pays the most business license tax, what does that represent if that employer goes away in terms of annual revenue to the city? Magnitude here when we're talking about a $60
Well, and I think
million.
you're hitting on something that's unique about El Segundo and the volatility of our revenues. Our expenses are by and large, we control our expenses, or we can control our expenses if we know we're going to have an issue. Revenues are more rely on our businesses and their success to fund the majority of our revenues. And we have 4 or 5 major employers who pay significant business license and utility user taxes. So if one of them goes into decline, or worse yet, and we don't have as much cushion for those one-time changes. But I think, Drew, the question you're asking is if one of those major corporations left, yeah, we could expect maybe a $2 million change in our revenues.
That wouldn't be just business license tax, like Greg said. There's Okay, I'm going to get into the budget assumptions that we use for the revenues. So overall, we do have an increase of budget to the adopted 15-16 budget. And some of those major items are the TOT tax, $3.5 million. Again, that's due to Measure B. I'm going from 8% to 12%. Franchise tax increase with the way SoCal Gas calculated their franchise fees to municipalities. So there was a court ruling that they do have to change that calculation, and they will be going from the sale, but also the annual receipts arising from the use, operation, or possession of the franchise within the municipality. So that will have, part of that is a one-time catch-up, and about half of that is ongoing. With Chevron increasing $750,000 next year, so going from 5.5 million to 6.25 million. And that has to do with, one, there's an escalation increase in that contract. And also, some of those revenues have decreased, which has caused an increase in the TRA agreement for next year. Other revenue, we do have an increase of about $600,000, and that's due to the developer agreement with Raytheon to increase the valuations, assessed valuations. Business license tax, about $215,000, and that's just a modest CPI increase that we're applying, and some additional businesses coming online. User utility tax, price of natural gas, that's going to continue into the 16-17 budget.
Yeah, so I'm surprised that the property tax increase is higher, your assumption is higher than the business tax, especially with the development east of Sepulveda?
The property tax basically is taking the 2% that were allowed with some increase in market valuations. So that's how we're getting to the property tax. And we use a tax consultant, that's the amount that they're projecting for 16-17. Business license tax. Yeah, it's community services is who we use. But also there's, I did mention in 15, so half of that gets credited back to them in 16-17. So there's a $300,000 decrease as well. So it's netting out $214.
Joe?
Yes.
When I meant, then that refers to an agreement between the city and Chevron that was reached in early 2013, correct?
Correct.
And I'd like to get a schedule. I believe it's over a 15-year period of time, and apparently it's not equal payments each of the 15 years. So I left the council in the spring of 12. I never got to see how that was going to flow. I have equivalent of school people asking, what'd you do with the lottery money? So no one's answered for me what happened with the Chevron money. It was $115 million, I think, or 118 pledged over a 15, because it looks like it represents $6-7 million a year to the city that we didn't have when I left the council. I'd like to see that schedule of how that's going to roll out in the next decade. Thank you.
Yeah, for the current year, Dr. Brand, there is $6,250,000 anticipated to come in for the TRA, I'm sorry, for 16-17. And that is, what you're going to be looking at is the overall general fund budget, so it's going to be put into the overall expenditures and used. Just real quick, on sales tax, I think most of you are familiar with sales tax in lieu, also referred to as triple flip. It was a program that began 15 years ago. The state, it was basically a tax grab from the state, municipal sales tax. So local sales tax is 1%. Cities were only getting 0.75 of that, and 0.25 was going to the state. That program ended this current fiscal year. So now cities will be made whole, and so I'm just go back to that real quick. So you will see a decrease in the sales and lieu tax of $2.2 million because that ended this current fiscal year, 15-16.
They'll see an increase on the sales tax, right? This is the last year we're going to have to talk about the triple flip.
So this is a chart just reflecting all the general fund revenue sources. The adopted budget for 15-16 reflected $6 million, with coming in at $4.6 million higher. So we did go over all of these revenue sources. Is there any specific questions that council would like me to address?
Can you just reiterate, best guess, what you think the percent of residential? I know it's hard to read from here because you have to ascribe certain values of property tax, et cetera, to commercial versus residential, but.
Right, so I do have a subsequent slide that gets into, I think it's the next, so this is a depiction of what our revenue sources are from. So we do have taxes, which is makes up 85% of the total general fund revenue. And then you do have other revenue sources, which is 10 point. Sources are listed out: license and permits, fines, interest and rental income, city services, intergovernmental. And then the taxes are listed out: sales and use tax, business tax, TOT, UUT, property tax, the TRA, investment businesses.
I think in the past, we've said that of the taxes, the tax portion of our total revenues, that 98% of those come from business. About 2% come from residents, and the residential property come from business or residents. It's a little bit harder to split up, but those are mainly plan check, building permit, rec and park fees, traffic or parking violations, those types of things.
So the city services line, other revenues of $4.9 million would definitely come from.
Yeah. Joe, the utility users tax piece of it, your explanation for why we're short of that is the price of natural gas. And in the last couple of years, the price of natural gas really hasn't declined. It's been pretty steady. So is there a usage component responsible for the reduction? Because we knew what the price of natural gas was going to be a year ago. It hasn't changed that much. So
there's a couple of components there. So UUT, you have natural gas, which has declined slightly, and bulk. And those bulk prices, they have told us, have significantly declined. So that they'll buy it different areas of the country and transfer it through lines into Southern California. And those prices that they're buying it in bulk and storing it, there is a usage component, and also part of that is water conservation as well. So water conservation is also impacting the UUT. This next slide depicts a 5-year trend of the major 6 major revenue sources. One thing was the number 5 revenue source in 2010-11, and in 16-17 that is anticipated to be the 3rd highest revenue source for the general fund, and that's continuing to increase. And our top 2, sales tax, is followed by business license tax.
Joe, you're trying to estimate the increased value of the TOT based upon the construction schedule of hotel rooms?
So it's construction, it's hotel rooms, and the Measure B as well. So we do have 2 hotels coming online in 16-17.
Right. But it is a little elusive to estimate their occupancy rates, and since it's 50%.
So the budget assumptions for the expenditures, there is an overall increase of $2.3 million excluding transfers compared to 15-16 adopt. Of that increase is due to personnel costs Workers' compensation increase of $1.3 million. Group insurance, which is a component also of retirees in there, $830,000. CalPERS pay, about $180,000. We do have a decrease in overall salaries of $190,000. That's due to workforce transition. So some of individuals retiring and new members coming in. This plan, also known as the 401A plan of $260,000. So that plan was discontinued in the current year.
Why was that discontinued?
I believe that was part of an MOU negotiation process at the beginning of January.
It affected the fire group, and it affected the management confidential and executive group. And you'll see in a moment that our healthcare costs for the management confidential group are going up, and that was a trade-off, essentially. Their salary increase and to partially make up for the 401A plan going away. The $189,000 salary decrease, Joe, that's really more a result of changes in state law and new employees that are now paying their share of their PERS, correct?
Be
Part of the
part of that.
smaller CalPERS increase. We would have had a bigger CalPERS increase if it weren't for the change in the state law.
So the PEPR law changed where new members, as of January 2013, are paying half of their normal. Some non-personnel cost increases, contractual services of $187,000. I did allude to this earlier. I gave the example of my auditor's increase, the CPI increase of 3%. So that's what that type of escalation factor in it. Training and education, an increase of $94,000. Software maintenance, $62,000, and that's primarily related to the library. Have new contract for Encore of about $17,000, and a new contract of $40,000 for fiber data line with a Khalifa group. Do the economic uncertainty fund, so we're proposing $250,000. So we're going to be ending the economic uncertainty fund at $1,250,000 at the end of this year. So it's $250,000 funding that's proposed 16-17 will bring that fund to 1 point. The ultimate goal is $2 million, yes. The facility maintenance fund, $350,000 for facility maintenance needs. Department. So we do have the adopted 15-16 budget compared to the proposed 16-17 budget. And again, I went over those major variances where most of them were related to personnel costs that are out of our control. Again, total of the next slide depicts the total general fund expenditures, and this is salary and benefits, which make up about 79%, versus the maintenance and operation costs, which is 21%, or about $13.6 million. And then within the salary and benefits, we do have salaries making up about 47%, retirement, which is counter categories. I wanted to put this in here, just an update of the 5-year financial forecast. I know I did have that in the strategic planning for August 3rd. We've updated that sessions, so I won't belabor you by going over these again. Dr. Brand, this slide here, though, you did mention the CalPERS pension costs, and here's a projection of public safety going from 5 by 2019-20. And the first 3 years, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, we know CalPERS already gave us that, and we're just projecting the other 2 years out. And miscellaneous, again, 17.7, projected out.
So these are known factors that you're working into the budgets in this year and the years to come. And this situation will either remain the same or get worse. Not going to be able to get better, right? Investments.
Correct, particularly if
Yeah.
they lower a discount rate, then these rates will just increase.
Yeah, because you get the money from the employees, the employers, or the investments. That's the three contributing factors to funding these pensions.
Another item I want to point out is the minimum wage increase. So that's state law. The governor passed that. We do have the first increase, January 2017, at $10.50 an hour, going up to $15 an hour by 2022. Here's the 5-year general fund forecast. We have the 15-16, which we already went over, 16-17 proposed, which we went over. In the forecast in the out years, we have anywhere between 1.5 million low revenues to expenditures. And again, I do want to emphasize that this does take the current MOUs and projecting those salary and benefit schedules out. Now, there's step increases factored in there, but nothing beyond. Cause an increase in salaries and benefits will reduce those numbers going up.
Joe, just to clarify, so $8 million increase almost over a 5-year period in revenue, and only a $500,000 increases whatsoever. That's just the same salary structure with these increases in.
Correct. Taking the
Burden
status
costs.
quo MOUs and then projecting those out.
Okay, thanks.
So we do have the other benefit factors increasing, but not the salaries.
5 years, the salaries are going to be increased. We're not competitive now against other cities vying for personnel. So once that occurs, whenever that occurs and how much is involved in it, then that comes out of the.
This next chart just depicts the prior slide in a line graph. P review. These are CIP projects that have funding identified for them. So you see there's gas tax funding, CDBG funding, state grants, water fix of $7.4 million. And again, these are not general fund funded projects. Any specific questions?
So the committee we have, the advisory committee, deal with these types of repairs? Do they prioritize these types or just the unfunded or non-funded ones? Been a number of years since I've been on there. So,
Our current practice is to have the CIP committee.
okay, thanks.
Do we have a sense of what they recommended that didn't make the shortlist? Is that in here?
We do, and I don't know if Stephanie has anything to add to that.
And I'm sorry, what was the question? Was answering another one on the side.
Which of the capital improvements didn't make this presentation? Do we have a sense of that?
There's actually a slide of that he's going to be producing later that lists some of those things. So the CIP committee reviewed, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but about these annual projects under enterprise funds. So we had put forward at the last strategic planning session that giant sheet that I provided you, kind of took all of this year's review and projected them out over 5 years to the tune of around recipe again.
These retractable bollards at Maine and Grand or wherever they're supposed to go, $90,000. That you don't have funding for it at this time.
That is correct. So in what I had proposed or discussed at the last strategic planning session was based on the priority of how they were ranked. The crosswalk on Main and the retractable bollards. But the totality of everything that's on the list exceeds what the current availability is under the option that Joe's going to be discussing. So I have reserve policy to 20%, you'll only have about 1.6. So there's a $500,000 shortage.
So you need $440,000 to run the table here, to do everything on this list. Is that correct?
No, I need to do.
I'm sorry, that's just your third column there. You need like, it's about $2.5 million to run the list,
Right,
right? Okay.
right.
So in the past, there was the potential of funding from Homeland Security, the grant funding. Is that still available?
Police may know I'm not aware of any funding availability for these particular projects.
For several years, I thought there was Homeland Security funding available for that, so but there was a window. That's why it's good to have an emergency manager.
Any other questions on the CIP?
So Mayor, that concludes the first major part of this presentation, which is the city's base operating budget. The next part of this discussion really is around what funds are currently are additionally available for other decisions, and some options around the reserve policies to determine what level of funding we'll have.
Break now, or are we
I
steaming
think it's up to the
forward?
council.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that if there was a possibility to do a permanent reduction, those would have been taken into consideration. Can you give us a sense of any staff count changes per department? Like I noticed, it's different in our proposed versus what it's been, but I would like to just get a sense of what departments' headcount is different than what it is this year, either increased or decreased. Is there a way to get a quick snapshot of that?
I can get what the current headcount is in 15-16 compared to prior years.
No.
For
I'm looking
16-17.
for the proposed budget, if there was a change to this budget that we're in right now.
No.
There were no
there's not.
changes.
There's no change. In those numbers that were presented, this is going to be a discussion that's going to follow right now. So this interactive discussion is going to bring up what those department needs are for personnel and increasing their FTEs. But in those numbers that I just showed you, those proposed numbers,
Library, not the strategic planning session, but the one last year. I think the library was the only department who didn't get the personnel they asked for.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, Mayor, is just, I happened, when she was talking, I looked at the library tab, headcount versus this year. That's why I asked if there were other changes like that, or.
It doesn't sound like there were any reductions in headcount in any of the departments. There has been a recent event with RSI. We have going to be a reduction in staffing in that program of about 7 full-time positions. If you do take a break, we can take a look at the headcounts are in the budget, the preliminary budget, and we can compare change from last budget. In this next section of the presentation, we're going to talk about some options for potentially increasing staffing to address departmental needs and customer needs.
Okay, I have 7:50. Shall we break to 8 o'clock? Is that enough time, city manager? Do you want?
is there an increase in library?
Zooming, pretty good. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, Council, the next portion of the presentation is going to be going over the reserve policy. It's myself, and we've come up with 4 policy options that we're proposing, and the city manager has prioritized some of the funding that against each of these options that we'll be going over here in a minute. So the next set of decisions, actual policy reserve. So again, our policy reserve states that we're going from 19% to 20% in 16-17. And that policy also states it's the greater of the adopted revenues or expenditures. Or do we adjust the trajectory to achieve the agreed upon reserve level? So do we want to keep it at 19% like we are this year and bring that 19% into next year? Or look at some other options, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. And again, this next phase, so to introduce the 4 policy options, we have option 1, which is the current policy, 20% of the greater of revenues or expenditures. So factoring in beginning fund balance of 7.8 and projected expenditures of 66.6, that leaves a net of 1.1 million to the positive. Factored in with the beginning fund balance, that leaves us a fund balance next year. With factor in the 20% reserve policy, that means a reserve of 13.6 million, which leaves about 1.7 in undesignated funds that is up to the discretion of the council to use. Policy option 2, again, taking those %, where it currently is at this year, will leave undesignated general fund reserves of about 2.4 million, or an increase of approximately 700,000. Option 3 is taking a policy, so again, policy option 1 and 2 was a greater of revenues or expenditures. Policy 3 is saying 19% of expenditures only, which will leave undesignated general fund reserves of about 2.6 million, or about 200,000 greater than option 2. Taking a stance of 18% of expenditures only, which will leave undesignated general fund reserves of about 3.2 million. And this next slide factors in the economic uncertainty reserve. Again, so if you factor that in, we do have total general fund reserves, option 1 of 22.2%, option 2 at 21.2%, option 3 at 21.3%, and option 4 at 20.3%. Again, that's with factoring in the. And before we get into the interactive discussion, just to remind you, August 3rd, we did have the strategic planning with Sarah, and the strategic goals, the high-level goals that came out of that. 1 is customer service and engagement, safe and prepared city. 4, quality infrastructure and environment, and then 5, technology. And the city manager and department heads will be working to develop a work plan around these and presenting it later, probably late October. Here's a quick snapshot of the various city manager recommended priorities, and I applied the correlated strategic goal to that priority. And option 1 is 20% of greater of revenues and expenditures. And with the 4 policy options that are there, does council want to have a discussion as far as where do we want the policy to remain? And 2, how do we want to fund that policy? Do we want to take, again, this is up to the discretion of the council and really needs to be interactive.
Can you give us some benchmarks, Joe? You know, what your association recommends as a reserve policy as percent of general fund?
There should be, but there is not a state law.
For public school districts, which of course I'm most familiar with, it's 3%.
Yeah.
If you drop under 3%, then you may end up like Inglewood getting a state for school districts. So I saw your survey, and some cities have as much as 100 and something %, and they're all over the place with their different numbers.
No, there's best practices, and just real quick, school districts, they're ultimately backstopped by the state. Cities are not. So with with best practices, so Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, which is a nation association, it's very prestigious, well-known. They're the ones that issue their certificate for the annual budget and annual CAFR. They do recommend anywhere from 10 to 20% as a best practice. And again, then there's certain needs that are a lot of cities will have a lot of debt. Unfortunately, we have very little debt.
The Economic Uncertainty Fund, we can't stand it. So its goal is $2 million, and it's sitting now at $1.25 million. So in essence, when you combine those two reserves, you're already over 20%.
You go with anywhere from 20, I believe it was up to 22.2%.
Mm-hmm. And then you have another $2 million, as we saw earlier, to the good, that came about because expenditures were lower than anticipated versus they're occurring each year. You've just gone through the Great Recession. We've turned 100 years old, and we don't get into that money. But it's going to have a factor here in this exercise as to how much we can do for this city, and it's what the whole game is here. And I maintain that we're not a bank, that we're a city that should be giving services to its people and taking care of its employees, and that we've been too conservative in salting away this money.
Well, I'd just like to say that just because, well, the event has happened in the past, 2008, 2009, we're looking, economic uncertainty is directly tied to what Mayor Pro Tem Boyle said. You have one large business leave town and you take it as for to be a buffer against that. The reserves are for other things. We still have a city to run if things go wrong or there's a disaster. We have payroll to meet, we have public safety, we have infrastructure that we have to do. So
From staff's perspective, we felt comfortable presenting these four options and being able to recommend option 4. Both the 19% general fund reserve and the economic uncertainty reserve, they equal $13.5 million. If you look at option 4, which is an 18% reserve against a higher revenue number or expense number, and you add $1.5 million. So it's not a reduction in the dollar amount, it is a reduction in the percentage against the total. It would still be our objective to get to 20 over time, but based on the needs that the city has, we felt comfortable recommending option 4. As we've noted, we do have some expected costs coming up that we will likely be coming back to council to fund from reserves later this year. Year, and it was a long time coming. It was the right decision to make. Was we drastically increased the reserves at Park Vista. We withdrew about $900,000 from the general fund reserve and put it in the Park Vista reserve. So that hurt us in this conversation, in this exercise. It helps.
Greg, what's the best and worst case on the dollar amount that will have to be funded from reserves later in the year?
I would use $500,000 as an estimate.
And option 4 still doesn't include that I see what I think is a priority for our city, an emergency manager. Do we have the numbers? That per
What the cost difference is between what we currently fund for a contract position versus a full-time position. Is that the total number, $140,000?
I'm sorry, the 105 is what?
So 140,000 is the fully burdened rate.
That's the burdened rate, and the 105 is the salary?
105,000 is a 9-month salary, because we're anticipating it would take 3 months to do the recruitment and bring someone on board.
But I think what, did you back?
That's 75,000.
75, so you can back another $75,000 out of that number.
So the delta is 30,000
For
For
a
what we already
partial
have.
year, yes.
budgeted, right? I think it's a priority for our city. Anybody get the alarm? That jolted, I was awake, but jolted many people out of their sleep. So because they thought there was an active shooter at the airport next door. And as I often say, we are ringed with terrorist targets, and the safety personnel have a job to do. Fire department has their duties, and the police department has their duties, both very important. That's when the emergency manager kicks in. Well, the emergency manager would always be working, but
Just to-
Option 4 did have $28,200 in undesignated dollars.
So here, when you look at the 10-year history of the general fund and what happened when we had the last downturn, there was, a $10 million reduction in revenues, but there was, when you look at that in the expenditures, there was also a significant reduction in expenditure, $15 to $20 million range, and that's why the reserves were aimed at the roughly 20%, the higher end of the recommended scale there, that in the event we have a future turn down, we don't reduce services to the percent of the budget is salaries and 20% is running the city, so to speak, when the ballpark big numbers here. And these big cuts, a lot of that came out of the 20% that's running the city. We've deferred a lot of maintenance, we deferred a lot of things that the reserves have a reduction in services again if we have an economic downturn. Now, I'm pretty committed to making sure that we get to the 20% funded on the reserve basis. Timing is negotiable. I'm a piece of it. I'm more flexible with that in my mind as opposed to that's something that can be used to bridge some short-term needs or desires, if you want to put it that way, things that we haven't been doing that we've deferred that need to be something that are, in my opinion, if you start dipping into that, then you lose the discipline to maintain that, and it won't be there should you need it. And I'm really hesitant to touch the 20%. Just want to share that.
right. And to use your point, Councilmember Dugan, with the 10-year chart that you're looking at, those last 3 years where the expenditures are less than the revenues, that wasn't by accident.
No.
I'm trying to write.
But it took 6 years to get from previous previous expenditures back into returning that type of a level of service, if you want to equate dollars to a level of service.
2 years to expect something, again, even with our facilitator, Sarah Peterson, I think she was saying that, the projections are 2 years. It's another, if not a recession, a downturn, or some sort of course correction.
So I think we're due. The question is, what will that do? And what I heard them say earlier is that we dipped into the reserves a couple $1 million even during 2009 and 10, right?
Mm-hmm. 2.6, I thought.
Okay.
I think another factor to consider is when you're looking at the city manager's recommendations, you have one-time costs, which are like the top 8 are one-time costs. And you have ongoing costs. So staff, personnel, that would be.
So you looked at 5 years out, right? But if we approve these ones that have a recurring salary component, those were not incorporated into that 5-year forecast, right? Because it was static, if I remember
Correct.
correctly. Okay.
Correct. And there also is a list attached, unfunded requests from departments, which you have in your package. I do want to point something out. I do have an addition. We didn't have time to incorporate that into everyone's package, but this slide here of these 4 items, including the emergency management coordinator, is not in your handout, but it is part of the unfunded requests.
Joe, the update, what does that mean? Is that bringing permitting online, better technologies? Sam, what?
So if you could speak to that.
It could ultimately mean those things, but for some of the things that came up during the strategic planning sessions, updating the permit system on the building safety side and the other departments, as well as having planning division on board. It is not GIS components and improve customer service. So there are a number of things that we think we can make improvements on for the $50,000, with ultimately having some customer service element on the web.
And then, Joe, on the technology side project, how about the website and any automation of city services?
The website we have some dedicated funding from previous.
Diverted to cover Richmond Street, or do we not use it?
What we diverted was the replacement of the enterprise system. We were under the understanding that we were going to be replacing our financial management system, our strategic plan, our IS strategic, of several more useful years of life in that system, and we don't have the immediate need to replace it. So we felt comfortable reallocating those dollars towards Richmond Street.
So we have, how much money do we have set aside to redo our website? Efficient enough to completely automate our services to our residents and business owners?
The RFP is out. We're going to find out when we get the bids in.
I mean, because that seems pretty cheap. I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit more than throughout, and have connectivity throughout the whole city, and have everything feed, like to have an enterprise system.
If you're looking at also automating.
I mean, I'm not looking at Mr. Savansky. Yeah. Brian.
Did you want Captain Avansky to come up?
Brian, why don't you speak to what's already funded but not on this list from a technology standpoint? And
so we went to council this last council meeting actually and put the information out that the RFP went out. There is a budgeted 150 from last year's CIP or this year's CIP. I can say that we met with a recruitment site for us, and it was up near 160,000. So 150,000 could be under budgeted, but to tell you how much it is, I am unaware.
Because our recs, we have to come up with a new Parks and Recs system to help manage the new pool. So there's a lot of automation that needs to happen. I'm just surprised it's not part of this proposal.
we did put on the list the additional, similar to the question you just asked, we did fund in previous years the El Segundo to the west side, and the benefits of doing that. We had previously budgeted dollars for that project. We need more. As a result of the bidding process, we found out that we need more. So the $350,000 would be additive to what's already budgeted. You also see number 9, which is the Information Services Director. We need someone to lead this effort.
So can you explain the difference between the 226 a year versus the 132?
Yes, 226 is for 12 months. We would anticipate that if council approves this request, 3 to 4 months. So the 132 represents the partial year funding for that position, the budgeted need for next year. Also on this list further down, you heard from our fire department that they have a need for time assignments, and the chief can speak further to what that provides. CAD RMS, Brian, why don't you explain what that is? But essentially, that's something, radio system, their technology. We have to change with them or go find another 911 provider, which I don't think there is one, but.
So, correct, but there's actually 2 projects. One is a software project, the CAD RMS, and that is the computer, our communication center is changing. They are going to a new vendor, and our choice is to go with them or try and again do our own. And then the second project is a radio infrastructure that's going to be regionalized, and most of that is being paid for out of grant. Will be paid mostly out of equipment replacement, which we will have probably 3/4 funded, and then we'll either use asset forfeiture or COPS funds.
To Councilwoman Perstick's comment, I also see we were talking about looking at Eden, the ERP, what's already available in terms of a business license module or other modules. Those are going to have to interface with the website. You can't just have a website unless you want to spend a ton of money on the functionality to build that out. So, assuming that Eden can develop, deliver the functionality that we need for some of this automation, ballpark, is it?
Yeah, to automate the business license. So we've already been in contact with our current provider, 15,000. Then annual license and maintenance fees, I think was just under $5,000. However, there's quite a bit of setup that needs to be done. We need to build a new server in order to accommodate that. So that's renewal process, which is this December and January, probably be the following one.
And then what about integration consulting? Do they provide that, or we have to hire folks to integrate? Do you know? Or is it just like they turn the module?
Actually currently using that software, and it's just an enhancement of that current software, where they can go on our website, click on a link, and it actually will revert them to the online application that's hosted.
And the marketing for Measure B, which is line item 8, that's about 2% of the difference we're getting? Oh, 3.2, so it's more than,
Right, the 200,000. It's going to be about 5%.
oh, 5% of the difference? No, I didn't mean total, I just meant the.
Of the increase.
Okay. Right. I just want, we committed to our hotels when we were campaigning for this, that we would do a set aside for them. So I want to make sure that.
I'd like to hear more about, there it wasn't by the previous council. I didn't commit to anything to help them. I think those hotels are being built by people who are experts at knowing they can fill up rooms. Advertising around their brand internationally. I suspect they've determined before they ever decided to build those hotels that they're going to fill them, just like the other ones are. So 200 more thousand. They've already got, I think, 240,000 from a donation from Chevron to help them with the marketing. I'd like to see them operate for a year and see how they do. Necessary, but why come into it if you're going to get there anyway?
Well, it's not just hotels, it's for all of tourism, for the museums that we have in town, for the restaurants, the retail. We want people to spend their money in El Segundo.
But what commitment was made general so it could pass at 50%? And there weren't any, during the campaign, lots of people said, what are you going to do with that money? Just give raises to everybody? And no, we'll spend it on infrastructure. But now the first thing we're talking about doing hotels in. So is there a commitment there, or is it just something we think we should do? I'm a marketing guy.
I'll tell you what I heard, Dr. Brand, when I was the chair of the Economic Development Council, was I heard a very organized group are actually very resistant to the notion of us increasing from 8 to 12%, and were more likely to support it knowing that there were going to be funds set aside. So I think you have to, if you're a marketing guy, you have to believe that marketing works. And so then the question is, comes from business, much of it, sizable amount from hotels and from retail and tourism. Will we be better off by spending $200,000? Will we get more guests into the room? Will we get more guests frequenting our restaurants downtown? In fact, many places, many cities, based on our research, that direct specifically part of their TOT to that. Now, I know it wasn't a special ballot, but there is a precedent for it for sure. And we can't keep relying. We were fortunate that they jump-started the program, and we did demonstrate that it works.
And that was a grant that we got this last year, and they made it pretty clear that they don't see any more of those types of grants in their future. In fact, they were surprised to be able.
I guess I'm just not convinced that spending this money is necessary to get the results that we want to achieve.
Well, it's marketing El Segundo.
Most organizations will depend on where they're at in the life cycle on marketing. We have a greater than $60 million general fund budget. We're looking at spending $200,000. on that. Now, if you factor in Barbara Voss and her department, maybe that's another $250,000, I'm not sure. But that's is, do we believe that marketing works? And if we believe that marketing works, do we believe that we're going to get more people into the hotels, more people into the restaurants, which will ultimately increase our tax base?
How are we going to measure that?
Well, we have, and those are targeted. That's not everything in town, but there's probably a way to enclose that too. And I know that we've been offered dashboards by PSM, and they have them and they've showed them to us on occasion, but sometimes it becomes too much to look at of all the analytics. But I think we've seen return on the money that we've spent, that's been given to us, that we've been good stewards of.
PSM and Barbara Voss indicated the types of metrics that they're going to measure going forward. And they're based on things like the hotel vacancy rate, the TOT revenues that the city receives, the sales tax revenues the city receives. Because we want to know. So that there was a list, and we can provide it for you, Dr. Brand, of the additional metrics and measurements that PSM and the city would be using as both the baseline and then the year one, year end results.
The measure B, that's the estimate, and what's that based on?
Joe just corrected me, it's $3.5 million in additional revenue, and it's based on a projection of the additional hotel rooms, an occupancy rate, and variables that make up the sum.
Is that with the expectation that the marketing would take place, or whether no marketing takes place, it's still going to garnish that, right? Right. So with the
Correct, status
marketing,
quo.
we'd expect more than $3.5 million.
Absolutely.
We just don't have a baseline year, you know. And you're figuring for your monies for the 16-17 fiscal year for the city, over to September.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we do have sub-baselines with vacancy or occupancy rates for the office space in town, and we could probably get that for hotels, and I don't know that version of that, but that can be done. We certainly have that information.
I just think we're addressing a problem that we may not have, and we're throwing money at it to necessary. That TOT, I expected if it ever did go up, it would go from 8 to 10. And it surprised me when it went from 8 to 12. That's why I asked, what was the commitment for the extra to know what that was? And I know legally there's no commitment there because of the way it went on the ballot. I just want to clarify, where we stood with that.
That was part of the commitment. Again, it was not on the ballot on purpose, because as you know, but that was, at that time, the council's commitment. And the mayor pro tem said that the hotels supported it, but even more important than that, they didn't oppose it. They didn't run their own campaign.
Okay, I'd like to ask another question about fees. The revenues you have planned here includes fees that we currently are incurring fees, then we wouldn't make the revenue totals that you've projected here.
Correct.
Okay. And what I heard about a lot when I was out talking to people was this ambulance fee. I don't know how much it's worth each year, and whatever damage that does to the incoming revenue, then I think we should take it, because I think it amounts to double taxation for our residents here. But you've got that factored in there. When are we going to have the discussion? A lot of these things came on in 2014 when the city was trying to digest the double-digit increases that were given in 2008 for a 3-year period.
And Councilmember Brown, I have requested that so that we could have that discussion, and I think Fire Chief Donovan might have that. But we're talking about still charging non-residents the delta between what their insurance pays, or...
Mayor, we actually have that item scheduled for next Tuesday night's council. If a change is made, we have a revenue neutral option that potentially offsets the resident copay component.
To be continued.
Chair, one kind of uncomfortable, just in the process of how we're doing our budgeting and our manpower here. And, a couple of years in a row here, you come in and everybody says, okay, I want an extra person here, I want an extra person. I don't know, measurement we seem to look at to justify that position is a cost. Can we afford to have that position, kind of a deal. Never do we get any work study information that says what's going on in the organization and else that's driving our desire to add manpower and staff here. So I'm uncomfortable agreeing to adding any positions out there without understanding what that really does to the organization. I see it, but I think that there's some work efficiency and some work study data that would really be helpful to help justify additional positions. And I don't think we should be presenting them as a budget-only position, needs and desires properly when we do it this way. So I'm just uncomfortable making those kind of decisions. I'm just sharing that with my colleagues here, so.
And I kind of agree with you, Mike, because if we do automate our websites, our recs and parks, then there should be some efficiencies of scales as far as labor. So I just want to make sure that we just don't add people to existing processes, which hopefully will be changing in the near future because we're going to automate.
And the department heads are prepared. This is a summary version. So the department heads are prepared to explain each of these positions, why they're necessary, what additional services or what current services are being done maybe inefficiently are provided by each of these positions.
160-ish, what are we back up to about 280 now?
So full-time positions, I believe it's on page 27 of your
Well,
staff
it's
report. I think
whatever
it's
the 320 was based on, if those were full-time.
Yeah, full-time positions.
Okay, so we're still down 45-ish.
To Councilman Dugan's point, I think former Mayor Sandy Jacobs was saying that one year the city did a zero-based budget. That do you recall that, Greg? Or I know you probably weren't on at that time, but so I mean that thought maybe for next year. But the other is that we had talked about some kind of activity-based costing or something, and also our fee structure, because we have not revisited our fee structure in many years, right? Is that the project cost for that? Is that incorporated in here?
So the project cost for that typically would run anywhere, and it's not specifically stated in the budget, though.
A question about
So we operate a
asking
hazardous...
about the Coupa position number 13 and an explanation on that. Sorry.
Why don't we have the chief speak to that?
Fine by me.
He can tell everybody what CUPA stands for.
The CUPA program is the Certified Unified Participating Agency, and it's a fancy word for our hazardous materials disclosure program. So we are one of a few cities in the county of Los Angeles that operate our own CUPA. If we didn't operate it, it would go out and do more inspection of all of our hazardous materials processing and storage. It also provides us an opportunity to integrate with our suppression forces and give our firefighters better inventory of it's a very beneficial program, which is actually funded primarily through the permitting process for those businesses. Yeah, in the past we have used our fire marshal to busy man, and we end up spreading him a little thin. So it's beneficial to restore that CUPA program. We'll get a better handle on the hazardous material processes and storage within the community.
Okay, and the former CUPA employee retired.
Correct.
Actually, in the CUPA program. Historically, it has had there's been two people involved in this program. We've been running it essentially with 1.5 or 1. And then as an example of where we're misusing someone's time, we've had to use our fire marshal to do some of these inspections.
long as you're up here, I support the mayor's priority of the emergency management coordinator, 17, the reason she outlined. I want to ask you about fire personal protective equipment and additional fire training funds and fire station alerting. Why they're on the unfunded list, I guess that's a question for maybe city manager when other things are on the funded list.
Yes, sir. The first one, the fire personal protective equipment, that is the firefighters wear to protect themselves when going into fires and other dangerous situations. We currently do budget PPE, personal protective equipment replacement, so there's a shelf life for them additional or new equipment. This plan was to get to this was actually a 2-year plan to get all of our firefighters 2 sets of turnout gear, 2 sets of PPE. It's not mandatory. This is a recommended national practice. I feel comfortable with the equipment that we buy, and our firefighters do have the proper equipment, so it's not a matter of being unsafe. It's just a plan to get to a second set of turnouts. What we have found is because of the products of combustion today, so hazardous material incident, we have to take the PPE and immediately wash and decontaminate. And if we do that, sometimes the firefighters don't have a second set of gear, and we're relying on, So this would be the first of a 2-year plan to buy 2 sets of turnout gear for every firefighter. The additional training funds, we're seeing a unique situation for our department at the first time in the last 7 years. And with that, I think it's important that we stay on top of training for our staff. I'm a huge advocate for in-service training and education. We do have a training budget for our upcoming year. This would just provide additional training opportunities for us. A unique software system that, as the dispatcher in the dispatch center is taking in the 911 call, as the dispatcher is typing in the information into the computer-aided dispatch center, what resource needs to be sent based on a GIS model and the type of call that they're going on. And the fire station will get what's called a pre-alert signal. And so it's a lighted and an important software program in that it gives us a head start in terms of our response. So anywhere from a 15 to 45-second increase in our response times. And we measure response times from the time the call. The one area that we could improve with technology and get our response times shaved down a bit is through this pre-alerting software system.
What is your response time now?
Depending on the type of call, if it's a fire call, we're trying to get on scene in less than 6 minutes. That's national average or natural standards, and we're currently beating those. The reality, though, is every second certainly helps us as it relates to the type of service delivery we give. So if you think about the worst case scenario on scene, certainly within 6 minutes at the latest, preferably 4 minutes or less, to provide a life-saving treatment to the patient.
This alerting could save you 15 to 45 seconds?
That's correct.
Previous council approved 1 set of turnouts. Have you received those?
Yes, ma'am. We do have we do have budgeting for turnouts for all new employees that we hire, plus those firefighters that have turnouts that have exceeded their shelf life. We buy and maintain full set of turnout gear, an ensemble for each firefighter. Again, the goal here was to get to 2 sets. And certainly we can work on this over the next several years to get there.
But I support that.
Yeah. Yesterday, but you were promoting a position, I can't remember the title, it was a full-time position and a new position for the department in fairly high level. I don't see that on here.
Since we've had turnover, we had 3 fire captains that retired, so we're promoting 3 new fire captains effective next week or the week after. We don't know exactly when. And with that comes upward mobility. So we'll have vacancies rank, and then we're hiring new employees. We hired one employee 3 months ago, and in fact, we found out today that the next set of employees have passed all of their background processes, and they're looking to start in-service training September, assignment October 1. So come October 1, we'll have 3 new firefighters, a promoted engineer, and 3 new fire captains.
Okay, I'm not sure that's what I'm referring to here, though.
Okay.
That all sounds good. And upward mobility from administrative tasks and, I thought I saw it in some of the things you sent home over the last few days.
There's a proposed reclassification in Public Works for administration. The personnel requests in fire rather than the Coupa?
Maybe you're talking about the reclassification of the firefighter to a paramedic position?
No, it wasn't that, because that's just a $1,000 a month deal. It's a no-brainer, figured out.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then also, on the lines of the unfunded, can you talk about the plunge, the filter replacement? Do we feel that we can limp along? Because it's $200,000? No, I'm asking.
Plan right now is to live with the plunge until the new aquatics facility is constructed, and then evaluate how much money we have, how successful the fundraising effort has been for the aquatics program, and ideally we'd be in a position once the Meredith Pettit, our Recreation and Parks Director, wanted council to be aware that if for some reason the plunge goes down, we need at least $200,000 for just the mechanical portion of the filter during this budget year. But it's more of a just a reminder that if those filter tanks cannot be repaired any further, or the equipment goes down to the point where it can't be repaired any further, we may be faced with having to come.
Yeah, we need to have a contingency plan for those filters being non-repairable, because that day is coming. I mean, we'll be able to patch them for a little bit, but sooner or later, we're going to need to replace the filters out there, and likely before to have that contingency plan in place. That's something that we ought to have ready to go.
Also, can you explain the new position for PSO animal control? So that means it's in addition to the PSO animal control we already have?
Police-related questions that you ask them all at once.
PSO position, in the past, we were able to fund a part-time employee that worked on the weekends for animal control. That person is no longer available to us. We no longer have 7-day coverage. We're asking for the additional PSO, animal control, and parking. It gives us full-time people as opposed to part-time dedicated to that.
So what happens on the weekend now?
Is that
What happens now on the weekend is that if a animal control comes out, and a police officer is available to handle the call, or if it's a call that can wait and we don't have someone in custody, we can send one of our PSOs out there, but only if there is nobody in custody.
So is the PSO animal control a sworn position?
So it would be animal control and parking.
Yes, that's what they would do.
So it's a combo.
It's a combo, yes, ma'am.
And that,
When they're not doing animal control, they're working parking.
okay, and animal control would include coyotes and all those calls that,
Yes, ma'am. Any type of wildlife call.
these questions for Chief?
The only thing is, so obviously you're down in current, you have open positions that you're currently backfilling,
Yes.
and you're asking funded, and then the CSI for property and evidence, and then PSO. Is that sufficient to, you're feeling that's sufficient to the changing demographic east of Sepulveda and the traffic?
What that does for us with the police assistance would allow us to open 7 for us. Currently now, it happens at times that we're not able to book female arrestees at our station. We don't have a female matron or a female PSO. But it also allows us to open up and have the lobby open again 24/7 for us. That one CSI position was lost in budgets, I think, 6 years ago. So they instead of doing crime investigative work, much of their time is spent doing property, because we have so much we book in, whether it's allow us to return the efficiencies we had before the budget reductions.
Chief, I thought we approved the additional police assistance before, and that we had a female jailer and other cities sent their female to us.
No, ma'am, we did approve LPS or to our ranks, but whether or not they're female or not, we cannot dictate that. It's the best person available to us. And our records management, or our records personnel, we lost 2 previously, and I believe it was back 2-3 years.
Other questions for the chief? Thank you, sir.
I'd like to bring up the human resources analyst, a new proposed. It's on the unfunded list, so I'd like to know what you wouldn't have there.
Good evening. The Human Resources Department is requesting an additional human resources analyst position. Just to give you a little bit of background, the department has leased fiscal year 2007, 2008. It's quite a long time. Since then, the program has changed dramatically in terms of its scope and its complexity, and it's due to a number of reasons. We have had some changes internally in terms of, we have had a number of issues that have come up in terms of changes in employment and labor law, and it has really put an onus on the staff in terms of addressing issues in a more professional manner, in a more expedient, handle sensitive issues appropriately so that it doesn't put the city at risk. A lot of what we do is also very time-consuming. Just to give you a sense, I'm talking about issues that deal with disability, issues that deal with labor relations issues. So it takes a lot of time for us to actually deal with the employee, deal with their representative if they're represented by an employee organization. We deal with the manager and the supervisor to handle a lot of time. A lot of what we do requires a lot of documentation, so it is very time-consuming. And we've reached a point in terms of the level of sophistication that human resources has reached that 4 full-time employees is just enough now. We have changing priorities, organizational priorities such as labor relations, which is taking a lot of time and seems to be a year-round endeavor. So in order for us to continue to deliver the kinds of services, it has become imperative that we need a 5th person in the department. And the level that we think is appropriate is an analyst level based on, it's the journey level professional position. We need somebody with the communication skills and judgment to be able to handle some of the sensitive issues that we're dealing with.
Didn't make the list here, the city manager, priority manager.
I think
making a great case here.
I think that you can use that same discussion on most of these items,
Yeah.
and it just became a very difficult set of decisions around what we can afford to do this year. The reserve policy list. There are going to be some services that continue to be challenged or difficult to provide, even with the recommendations that I've made. But again, it becomes a balancing act of what are items on this list that maybe don't get funded this year, but we begin the conversation and we hope to fund those in future years. We had the same conversation last year and maybe the year before about the library position, and I am recommending in order to meet those service needs and make that organizational change as an example.
I like that.
May I ask Martha a question? If I recall correctly, a lot of our HR processes are still manual. HRIS, for example, or we have Eden, I suppose, right?
We have Eden, that is our human resources platform, and we have NeoGov, which is our online recruitment system.
Yeah. What would it require for us to get our employee handbooks online? I mean, do you have a sense of what that would require from a technology investment standpoint?
I think getting all of that online in and of itself is really not going to be labor intensive. I think we're still going to need somebody to review, go through the handbook and the policies and procedures and actually redo them and update them and monitor them to make sure that they're consistent with laws, with our organizational policies and procedures. But as far as putting them online or automating maybe some of those functions, I don't think that it's going to,
Yeah, I'm not suggesting it's a headcount replacement. In fact, with those systems, you typically need a system admin that you did not have before.
right?
That project would require. Seems like a big opportunity for the city.
It would be a great opportunity for us. There certainly is a lot of room for improvement there. I think working with Eden and the system administrator so we could see which, I think that Eden's system has the capability to help us automate a lot of the responsibilities that we have. Because we're talking about laws that apply across the board, like the Affordable Care Act. They've created modules for us to today. They've created modules for that. Workers' compensation, OSHA issues, they've created modules for that. So we would just need somebody to help us to start tapping into those modules, and then maintaining should not be very adequate staffing to actually dedicate somebody to do that. And I think an additional body is definitely at a minimum what we would need.
Question? The internally, not for HR, but for Parks and Recs, there's nothing in here for a new automation of Parks and Rec system? And we're not anticipating automating in preparation for the additional?
Is there anyone here from?
I believe that, well, in Meredith's discussions, I believe she felt that she could go another year before that happened. Yeah, fall of 18. We're going to have an aquatics update on your September, what is it, 20th agenda?
6th or 20th?
Yeah.
20th. One other item here, an unfunded, not related to that. The Centennial Celebration, TBD. This is a one-shot, and we're only having one centennial, at least in my lifetime. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was Centennial Celebration Committee that's been working like crazy and coming up with events and things, souvenirs to sell. There's a very small group of people, but as you realize, we're all competing for the same funds for the businesses in town. So I would like the city to commit a substantial amount to this.
So one thing that council did last budget year with effort is sort of some pre-funding. We're going to carry over those unspent dollars to next year. And I believe we've spent about 5,000 or so, about proportionally about right.
Roughly, yes.
So our question is, are there going to be fundraising efforts? We believe there are. Is 25,000 going to be enough, coupled with funds that are raised? We don't know what the right number is for that total amount right now.
Right, but if we could earmark some funds. So there is fundraising and going out after the same businesses and sponsors in town. Yes, and the schools and everything else, so I would like, and if we don't use it, it'll go back to the general fund, but even another 50,000 to go to the 25, so.
We increase the stuff that's funded for, to cover the website, another $200,000 just to cover the website and other system needs, because I don't feel you have enough sufficient funds identified in the above the line to cover your automation, because I think $150,000 is not going to be sufficient to really automate that website.
I think what we can likely do is talk to some cities that have recently replaced their websites and get a better handle on what they spent. And maybe the $150,000 is not another $200,000 is necessary either, but.
It's not just the website, it's the integration, the components to make sure that Eden is speaking to everything and that your CAD and RMS speaking are speaking. It's about the connectivity of all this. So it's not just the website. Okay. The website is the shell. It's the back-end systems.
Yeah, we've got a technology committee that's going to be starting here in the next month or two. I think the goal is to have them help us shape the vision of how we can implement it throughout. So it's tough to peg this one without really knowing. I feel like if you really dig into it, there's several opportunities to enhance the way we're doing things with technology. I'm not saying we replace, people replacement. It's just a way of doing things better. There's
Councilmember Dugan wants to wrap this up.
So is there direction by council that you want to direct staff to go to for 16, 17?
I'm going to propose option 4 based on, again, we have not dipped into the reserves more than a couple million in any given year. Economic uncertainty, we are higher than the recommended 15 or whatever the 15%, 20%.
He said
What's
there
the number?
wasn't one.
Your association throughout there?
Yes.
Joe?
So 10 to 20%
10 to
is
20.
best practice.
So that's what I propose, option 4.
That we discussed.
I think what Joe was trying to get was
This
the
is
first
just the
decision, which
reserve-
is...
Yeah, this is just about the reserve level, and I
Right.
second Mayor Pro Tem Boyle's for option 4.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I'm opposed just because of the being without I don't think we're vetting those properly and to see that they're truly justified. I know that they mean well. I don't have an issue with it other than I'd like to have a more thorough vetting of adding any kind of manpower to the city staff.
We've agreed to that. With this is just about the reserve level. Now, the city manager's made some recommendations on what to fund with those discretionary monies that option 4 presents. And we agreed.
Correct.
This is just about the level.
Well, you
Yeah,
got-
so you don't have to spend the money if you don't want to spend the
Yeah.
money. It's just the reserve.
So,
All right, I thought we were taking his recommendations as well, so I stand
No.
corrected.
No,
But I'll
no.
still stand
My
with
understanding was
yes
they're
vote.
taking, there's 20 items up there that add up to $3.2 million bucks. And
Basically, option 4, just as it applies to the general fund reserve policy, which is that we go forward 18% of expenditures, right? I know we're going to vote on it, but it would be good also to get clarity around economic uncertainty versus the reserves, because I'm still not 100% clear on that.
I'll second this motion, which is what I thought and I think he did say in the first place. And then we can debate what we wish, and then Mike will be okay, and we're not there quite yet.
Okay, restated. We're just voting on 18% of expenditures, option 4. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Now, do you want to know anything else? What do you want to know now?
Well, he at least he needed
I think just
consensus
direction.
to get direction, so the show.
he needed a majority, he didn't need a consensus.
We have that piece of direction.
Yeah.
You got what you need.
One other item I do want to point out, which we haven't focused or discussed on yet, is there's budget neutral requests in here. Planning has some requests, and it's switching out some budget that they have in professional services, contractual services, and moving that into staffing. Then finance has a budget neutral request, reclassifying a accounting manager position, which is getting a full-time accountant and one part-time accountant. Then Public Works and Parks and Recs also have some budget neutral requests.
Then there's a final piece also, Joe, which is the, other than from the general fund, correct? There was some water positions and the
Oh, that are
asset
funded by
forfeiture,
enterprise.
asset forfeiture requests and COPS grant requests.
Repurposing the PBM.
So the planning and building safety is really more along the lines of sort of a reorganization and a philosophical change. And I think Sam Lee has several slides that he wants to present. I would ask the council and the mayor to September 6th also, if you wish, but just so that we can plan on best use of our time. How much later do you want to go tonight?
I think we should get through the entire package. So there's not that many slides.
Do you
And then it's
want
coming
to-
back on the 20th.
Do you want
and the
to go
27th.
through decide how you're going to spend the $3.2 million tonight in option 4, or you want to put that off till the 6th?
We need more time to digest
Okay.
that, so.
All right, so let's get through the rest of the presentation, and then you can give or better present the $3.2 million list of items or the other items on the 6th.
Sam, if you want to. Just your item.
Thank you. So, we are thinking about, we wanted to do a reorganization of the department. And so I prepared some slides to kind of put things in context and kind of explain a bit of the history of the staffing levels for the department, specifically homework. I looked at kind of a historical view going back to 2003, 2004, and these identified these were all the cost of the salaries for the full building and safety department. And I wanted to point out in the last 5-6 years that there's been a downward trend on the cost for salary. It's been hard to fill vacancies, and then the difference between the pre-Great Recession era and the after Great Recession era. And after looking at the salaries, it wasn't a complete picture. We also have to look at the consultants number of actual costs that the city incurred over those 12 years or so. And what you'll see is that there's in the last 3-4 years, there's been an uprise in the with less internal staff and more consultants. We've had some problems. We've had some issues with with having consultants do some of our work for us. There's been problems with maybe lack of ownership, institutional knowledge, and I think all of those things has had a negative impact on customer service. And so those were the historical costs for staffing levels and consultants. And so I graphed this. The bottom graph shows the combination of the staffing level cost plus consultant cost. And the upper graph shows the revenue. What you'll see is that in last year, we've exceeded the number of from 2007, 2008, which was a huge peak. 2006, I wasn't here. I was in a different city, but economic boom. Some people will say the boom before the crash, right? Before the Great Recession. But last year, we've actually exceeded that number by significantly. So the work's there. Work's come back for us. Prior to the Great Recession, and we've always had 2 plan checkers, 2 counter staff, and 3 inspectors. That was kind of the common staffing level pre-Great Recession. And then asked to do more. Not only me, but all of our staff. So we lived with maybe about 6 years period where we lived with 1 plan checker and 1 counter staff and 2.5 inspectors. So the staff, yeah, we can get by, but what happens is when somebody calls in sick, a counter staff or a plan checker calls in sick, that service isn't there. So we're on emergency mode to provide the level of service that we need to do. Extended codes are constantly changing. Has been an extremely difficult thing to do for the past several years. The economy's turning, and we're getting better. Last year, we put in the budget 1.5, a part-time position, and we finally added a second counter staff. But we've had some problems with filling that position, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. So, request funding from the general fund. It's cost neutral, but I'm asking that the part-time 50 percentile senior plan check engineer position be converted to a full-time plan check engineer position at a cost of $78,000. We tried to recruit for that last year. It was about 6 months ago. We struggle with that. I believe partly because the licensed permit specialist is a joint position. It's a position shared by finance, and finance was also looking for a business license person. Majority of the applicants were towards the business license side. And the pool of people to look at from the building and safety, looking for is changing of the name, the reclassification of the licensed permit specialist to a development services coordinator or permit coordinator. But at the end of the day, I think it's somebody we're asking them to do more. So coordinating the permit process for our businesses for not only building and safety, but planning, public works, fire, police. It's all of the development related teams. And we're estimating that may mean from a salary uptick of about $26,000. We're not sure, but we're thinking that may be the case. The third item is really the single new position, and that's the plans examining position. Where I find is we really struggle with that from a customer service standpoint. Everybody's concerned about the architectural, the structural, so the building superstructure starts to get up, but inspection related to mechanical, electrical, plumbing. And we don't have anybody in-house that can do that, not even a single person. So what happens is we send out all of those jobs to our consultants, which isn't bad. I mean, I'm not asking for this position, $106,000 I'm asking for this position, but from a customer service standpoint, it's huge. Even the smallest jobs, medium-sized jobs, it all gets sent out. And whenever it goes out, it takes a week or two just to do the paperwork. And if we had to the customer service, so that's $106,000. The planning technician is actually not from building and safety, but it's on the planning side. And it's a position that existed pre-Great Recession. That person, and ever since, we didn't backfill it. And you may recall back in December, several of our planning staff retired or left to other cities. And we were really hurting for people. It was a planning technician. That person who's filled that position has helped tremendously. He's been a tremendous help at the counter for customer service, providing zoning information. And what we found was that has freed up time for our assistant planners and principal planners to do some of the process improvements and code adoption processes and stuff like that. So I think it would be a great value to add that position back at $80,000. Again, those have money in the consultant budget that I think it would be worthwhile taking that money and applying it for these 4 requests. So that concludes my thoughts.
So there are lots of differences, like you said, ownership. But then the city employees have benefits and CalPERS and retirement ever.
And planning and building safety has always operated on a blend to handle the typical functions and the core, the sort of standard level of activity. And then we bring in consultants to deal with spikes in activity and specialized reviews. And I think that's still going to be the model. But the question that's really being presented to council is the right blend. Mm-hmm. We've cut the blend down to rely more heavily on consultants, and we've seen a service impact on the customers as a result of that. Yes. So we're asking to change that blend back. We think that by doing that, it will help us build a workforce and continuity and overall improve. Your consultant budget for next year, if you reduced it by $291, would still be a sizable number, I believe.
It'll be about $130,000, $140,000. So we'll have some flexibility built in.
We do have some additional difficulty in that pre-cities to come in and act as consultants, and it was good for us because they brought the experience. We're really not able to do that to any great degree anymore.
So I just have one question. You were talking about the licensed permit specialist moving to development service coordinator. With this change, what happens to the shared portion that went into the finance department?
Well, maybe I should explain what I said shared. The position exists in both departments, so the title exists in both departments. If I choose to change the name of the 2 counter staff, then what will happen is we'll make the separation between the finances position and building and safety's position.
And
Sam,
so additional 26 or one?
That's for 2 people.
So it's
So-
split then?
Yeah, so
13.
with discussions, so what happens with when you reclassify a position like this is HR will reach out to nearby cities and look for similar position. The additional the title will cost an additional $13,000 per position.
And how much does this position get paid today, the licensed permit specialist? Approximate.
Included, it's about $100,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so the salary portion, I think, will be about 2/3 of that, so.
And we couldn't find someone to fill that position for $100,000 or $80,000?
They're not engineers.
So what
They're
are
not
the qualifications for a licensed permit specialist?
Currently, they have the same qualifications as somebody who's doing license processing. We went out to recruitment, and we didn't find the 2 licensed permit specialists that we were in recruitment for last year. So
We didn't look hard enough because
You referred, Greg, to PEPRA rules and them discouraging or preventing the use of retired, experienced pros from doing this kind of work. What happened there that is?
Well, you're right. HR and potentially the city attorney can explain the law better than I can, but essentially there was a feeling that once people started receiving a CalPERS retirement pension, that they should not be allowed to come back and work in the public workforce. Explain that prevent us from rehiring those folks unless they're willing to forego their pension, which most time they're not willing to do.
Can't they
for a
get in
part-time
like
job.
980 hours or something without pension?
I think Mark is volunteering to answer this question.
He was sleeping, so.
The 960 hours, that still does apply. That's a maximum that you can work if you're retired. Other than positions, or director positions or the city manager position, we are prevented from hiring retired annuitants from PERS into those positions. There are also some exceptions for police officers, positions that Sam Lee's talking about if they're retirees.
So they can't do their 960 hours there.
No. There's limited positions left in cities in particular.
Okay, and is there a sit-out period after, the day after they retire? Do they have to stay out so long to do any kind of work back?
6 months.
6 months, yeah. Yeah, I knew about that, and I knew about the 960 hours, but I didn't know, that's really not such a smart law. It's just like we have with the retired teachers. You've got all your expertise, and you're not putting it on the field because they're so worried about a few people that need to gain expertise. The most expert people are the people who did that kind of work for the last 30 or 40 years. We can't get to them. That's silly. Save it for the legislature, I know.
Well, just 1 minute is I've actually been a very proponent of the hybrid model of having some core staff and really utilizing the consultants. It's been more difficult last several years. I think partly because hiring right now, and there's been recruitment. I've seen a lot of cities ramping up and hiring. So those cities are taking a lot of good people. And also, the second type is, and so you take away a lot of the good people who that might have been in the workforce, and then you remove the retirement people. All of a sudden, the type of people that are available for the hybrid approach has been it's been a struggle. So I'm sorry, Mr.
You need to develop people all the way through the organizations, and that way you've got a constant stream of people. We don't do that well enough here, I don't think. That's an opportunity for us to get better. I'm struggling here looking at the I see the words plan examiner here, and I'm trying to understand the difference between a
Plan check engineer are people who have a licensed engineering degree and are professional engineers. The people who are more in the field of mechanical, electrical, former contractors, maybe high school graduates, those people can be certified to plan check mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So, so that's why that position is called a plan examiner. Call those people who don't have an engineering degree or licensed engineers. So we call them plans examiners. That answer the question?
It does, but then it raises another question to me is, you know, you deal with residential, commercial, and industrial permitting around here, and three categories that doesn't match up to what I can understand. So, you know, I struggle with, you know, we're putting in a, you know, I'll call it a junior grade plan checker in there to handle things. To do what?
You're talking specifically about the plans examiner, why
Right.
that is a non-engineer position?
Right.
So
I don't have a problem with that other
My
than-
goal, I think my goal would be to, again, right now, we're sending everything to consultants, right? So when, for the, I think it was an $80 million data center, we sent that to an engineer, electrical engineer, to check the electrical component. So we have very complicated buildings, and for those things, we send out to specialists to do that. This plans examiner smaller and medium-sized projects to provide a higher level of service for those folks. And I think it'll be cost neutral. And also at the same time, they can become a program coordinator to interact with our consultants for.
No, thank you, Sam. And your department does, I know, an extraordinary amount of work.
A couple more slides to get to the presentation. This slide represents the budget request from other funding sources than the general fund. We have the COPS grant fund funding the station video storage of the RSVP vehicle. I know PD is looking at an alternative to that funding right now. That could be cost neutral to the city. Asset forfeiture fund or COPS grant fund for the network of the South Bay. Equipment replacement fund, also for the radio system upgrade and replacement fund, $800,000. So that's totaling $1 million for that. Then CAD RMS replacement, $230,000. And if you recall from the general fund, I believe it was $80, it's $310 total. Then water operations fund. There's some requests in there for new positions and reclassifications of positions. So total other funding requests of $1.5 million, and those funds are available.
Losing access to those because we don't participate in the task forces that we used to that would qualify us to
And they've changed
obtain
the
these
rules on what-
funds?
and they've changed the rules on what you get too. So
The
Right.
assembly just passed.
Yeah,
don't count on that.
You're right, sir, and I have full faith I won't.
Sorry, Chief.
Sir, we do have money in the pipeline coming in to do what we cannot sustain just for this purpose. And we saw this in the future. We put that money aside to spend for these large items. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the money to do it. So we do have that. Our plan is, once we are fully staffed, to go back and try to get back into
Get from asset forfeiture versus how much we'd pay for the officer we withdrew from it. In other words, did it make any sense to withdraw someone from that task force given what we're going to lose in the future?
Well, is the flow of money coming in from some of our task forces was reduced dramatically. We had one that was, we were obtaining quite a few, our funding on it was, in other words, was continuation, but because of what happened with sequestration, that pipeline opened up again, but those officers were removed and put into patrol. That's where they're put at for right now. So once we can establish a baseline again to where we can fill patrol and grow our department, we plan to go back to that task force.
Bill, Assembly Members Hadley and Mitchell, decreasing the amount of funds or changing the laws of how assets?
It really doesn't
are
affect us in
seized?
those task forces because the amounts that they put it down to, we don't fund. The task forces that the officers worked were going after major narcotic traffickers, and their funding was usually far above $40,000.
Thank you.
That article in the paper centered in Torrance, and their success that week was pretty important.
Yes,
And successful.
Yes, with the knock-knock burglars.
Right.
And so, we did actually participate in that week in taking down those offenders.
Were we part of that long-standing task force?
No, Doctor.
Seemed very successful. Maybe we'll realize the benefits of.
Our borders, we don't have a moat, so our borders are fluid, and law or offenders from Torrance obviously come to El Segundo too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chief.
So,
No, go ahead.
so next steps would be to bring back the options and how to fund these particular requests on September the 6th. Also, some key dates that we have are September 20th would be the first reading of the proposed 16-17 budget. Then September 27th, the second reading and adoption of the budget. So those are potential. Is there any other further questions for the presentation?
So following that timeline, then, council needs to do some homework and I think should be on the list of funded items compared to what city managers recommended. We either agree with it or we tweak it, but we need to be ready for that because you'll need that to prepare the preliminary on the 20th. 7, 8 days.
And is that when you'll have the real-time Excel spreadsheet again that we can?
Yes,
put
I
the
actually
numbers
had it
in?
available today if we wanted to get into that, but I think it's a little late. But yes, I do have
That
it.
was very helpful last year.
Yes.
What did that do for you?
It was auto-populated the new balance at the bottom so you could see exactly every decision you made. You could see how it affected the bottom line.
Before we leave, I want to compliment the staff, the city manager, and the business department, and making it so that we could understand what our choices were. I just think the flow of information has been timely and well organized and tasked. So thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I thank Joe and his staff earlier, but this is the best package I've ever received in 6 years with information, everything you've done. It's been
Thank you.
excellent.
Thank you.
Dan was referring to.
Absolutely. Email it to you, yes. So then we're just focusing on option 4, and that's what I'll email to you.
Yep.
Okay, so I do not see another public comment. Everything? Doesn't matter. Okay, so with that, we are adjourned, 9:45. Thank you.